Hey students, today's topic is about the movement of diaphragm. The chest wall is made up of ribs, muscles and skin. The ribs are attached to the angle of the spine. The ribs are attached to an angle to the spine. Now let's imagine the diaphragm as a floor and the chest wall as a room. The lungs itself, it can neither take in air nor give out air. The lungs themselves can neither draw in air nor push it out. Instead, the chest wall, the muscles and the diaphragm helps the lungs in moving the air in and out of them. Breathing is a physical process of taking in air and sending the air out. That means inhalation and exhalation. Now let's see the movement of diaphragm. When the diaphragm flattens the chest wall, the volume of the chest wall increases. As a result, the internal pressure decreases and hence the air from outside rushes into the lungs. This process is called as inhalation. When the diaphragm flattens, the volume of the chest cavity increases. As a result, the internal pressure decreases. The air from outside rushes into the lungs. This process we call it as inhalation or inspiration. When we exhale air, the chest wall is lowered and it comes to the inward portion. So when we exhale air, the chest wall is lowered and moves inward. And then it relaxes the diaphragm. Then the diaphragm looks like a dome shape. These changes increases the pressure in the lungs and the elastic tissue contracts. As a result, it squeezes the air out. That means it sends the air out through the nose to the external atmosphere. This process is called as exhalation or expiration. So we call this process as expiration or exhalation. Now let's see to the movement of the diaphragm. The chest wall is made up of ribs, muscles and the skin. The ribs are attached at an angle to the spine. The diaphragm may be imagined as a floor if you think the chest cavity as a room. The lungs themselves can draw in air and nor push it out. Instead, the chest wall muscles and another flexible flattened muscles called diaphragm helps the lungs in moving in air and out of them. When the diaphragm is relaxed, when we breathe out, it is in the shape of a dome. When the diaphragm is relaxed, when we breathe out, it is in the shape of a dome with convex side extending into the chest cavity. When the diaphragm contracts during inhalation, it flattens out a bit or the dome moves downwards. As a result, the volume of the chest cavity is increased. Now let's see to the diagram the movement of diaphragm. This is called as chest wall muscles. Here we can see the chest wall muscles. Trachea is also called as windpipe. These are the rib bones. Bronchi. The trachea is branched into two bronchi. Lungs. This region we call this as diaphragm. Breathing is a process of inhalation and exhalation of air. When the diaphragm flattens and the volume of the chest cavity is increased, its internal pressure decreases and the air from outside rushes into the lungs. This is called as inhalation or inspiration. When the diaphragm flattens, the volume of the chest cavity is increased. Its internal pressure decreases and the air from outside rushes into the air from outside enters into the lungs, rushes into the lungs and enter into the lungs. This is called as inhalation. During breathing, when we exhale the air out, when the chest wall is lowered and moves inwards and the diaphragm relaxes, assuming its dome shape. These changes increases the pressure on the lungs. Their elastic tissue contracts and squeezes the air out. When the chest wall is lowered and moves inward and the diaphragm relaxes and assumes its dome shape, these changes increases the pressure on the lungs. Their elastic tissue contracts and squeezes the air out of the nose to the external atmosphere. This is called as exhalation or expiration. Now let's quickly sum up. Breathing is a process of inhalation and exhalation of air. When the diaphragm flattens, the volume of the chest cavity is increased. Its internal pressure decreases and air from outside rushes inside the lungs. The air from outside rushes into the lungs. This is called as inhalation or inspiration. When we exhale the breath, when the chest cavity is lowered and moves inwards, the diaphragm relaxes and assumes a dome shape. These changes increases the pressure on the lungs. Their elastic tissue contracts and squeezes the air out through the nose to the external atmosphere. This is called as expiration or exhalation.